What's going on, everyone? It's Hero here, and with the latest weapons balancing patch for Destiny, patch 2.4.0, I wanted to take a moment and have a little discussion with you guys regarding my thoughts on the patch as a whole. Before we get started, just in this day and age, I felt the need to sort of qualify myself as to my credentials, if you will, for speaking on the subject. Yeah, you might think it's dumb, you might think it's overkill, but I just felt like it would provide a more complete commentary. So I went to Destiny Tracker, pulled up my stats, and so here they are for the first 2 years for Destiny. This is not like a make excuses, this is not me trying to gloat or look good, it's just 100% transparency so that you guys have some context as to what kind of player you're hearing from, and to allow you guys to make a judgment call as to whether you want to think I'm worthy of talking about this or just completely trash and not qualified. Whatever you want, the stats are there, not trying to hide. There they are. Okay, I apologize. With that out of the way, let's get right to it. So I contemplated doing gameplay in the background for this video, but I felt it would be more effective if we just went through the list right from the Bungie website with a screen recording. That way you guys can see visually, what we're going to be talking about. It's right there on the screen. You can pause and read, or, just have it up. So that's the format that I decided upon. So without further ado, let's get started. As a whole, I think this is a good patch. We'll talk about my individual thoughts as we go through it, but generally speaking, good stuff here. First up is the Fabian strategy. Kills with this weapon now automatically load a portion of the magazine, in addition to increased base range and stability. I think this is good. Not much to say here. This archetype of auto rifle, as well as this particular rifle, just don't see a lot of use right now, and definitely could use any love they can get, so good job there. Moving on to a perhaps more controversial weapon, we have Thorn, with a reduced base range by 25%. Now, this gun has been hit many, many times with the nerf bet, and granted, most of those nerfs I think were definitely needed. This, on the other hand, I feel is a little bit overkill. If you watch a lot of high-level Destiny, or you play a lot of, skirmish, salvage, anything where your slightly more serious players are, you will notice that it's pretty much just AS Luna and the last word when it comes to hand cannons. Thorn is definitely still used from time to time, but it's nowhere the beast that it was back in year one, and I feel as if Bungie and the community is kind of just recalling these memories, or I should say nightmares, they had of this weapon back in year one, and I think this is overkill. Thorn is not really that bad now, and I think reducing its range by 25% will be the coup de grace for this weapon in terms of high level viability, if you'll allow such a term. If they wanted to maybe tweak the range stat a little bit, maybe they could have replaced Send It with like Hammer Forged, or reduced the range slightly, but I think 25% is overkill here. We will see how the community reacts to this. Excuse me. Next up is Universal Remote. The exotic perk range bonus reduced by 75%, in addition to increased rate of fire. So the community definitely had their pitchforks out for this gun. It was definitely, there were a lot of people calling for a nerf, and I think it was somewhat justified. I mean, the range at which you could get a one-hit kill with this weapon, a consistent one-hit kill, was pretty far. I believe the furthest out of all shotguns in the game. I think Fallout Plays did a video on that recently. I can link it in the description. So this, a nerf I think was definitely wanted, and people were actually, for sure calling for it. I would like to provide one small little counter argument, and that is, shouldn't an exotic version of a particular weapon be the best variant of that weapon? That's sort of a subjective argument. You can't really assign data to that, but I feel that exotics should be standout, and universal remote is a primary exotic weapon, so you have to queue up your primary slot, thus your ability to compete at your typical mid-range-ish primary range battles, and it takes your exotic slot. So I feel like those trades, I mean, you're giving up a fair amount of your versatility, and you should be rewarded with something that is at least usable. So we'll have to see how this change acts in the wild, but I think it was definitely called for, perhaps a little too drastic. We'll have to see. I think overall good though. Moving on to Drake's Promise. This gun doesn't see a lot of use in both PvP and PvE, so increasing the damage by 8% as well as its magazine size by 3, those are both welcome changes. Hopefully we'll see a little bit more of it. Very unique sidearm. So next up is Touch of Malice. With the Touch of Malice's self-damage infliction will now remove Blessing of Light. The timing of this, I feel, is a little odd. I understand where Bungie is coming from. I feel like they saw the videos and such of people melting Prison of Elders bosses with the 2 Titan bubbles and Touch of Malice, and they wanted to basically, curb that strategy for any sort of future use of it, I guess, in, future content, maybe the next raid or whatever. But I just feel that for its primary uses, this is interesting but a little too late. Touch of Malice is primarily shines, as they say, specifically in the raid, King's Fall, particularly with the Oryx duty, Ogre duty on Oryx. But I feel like this is just a little bit too late, with King's Fall and Prison of Elders basically on their way out. I don't understand why this didn't come a little bit earlier. People are going to have to adopt their strategies, for taking care of ogres on Oryx. Use a different weapon. Sleeper Simulant will be just fine for most cases. But I understand kind of where they're coming from with this, and kind of just preventing this kind of being the new Yallarhorn, if you will, boss melting strategy. So I understand this one. I just feel it was a little too late. The Boolean added intrinsic perk high caliber rounds. Great. The archetype that the Boolean is in, that kind of Vision of Confluence mid-tier impact, is not super competitive right now, and anything they can do to add a few more tools into the toolkit of this weapon is great. This weapon definitely could use a little bit of buff, and this is good. No Time to Explain added intrinsic perk Headseeker. I mean, we'll take it. I don't believe that adding Headseeker will decrease the time to kill of this weapon or make it all that more deadly. I feel that instead of adding Headseeker, what they could have done to increase the viability of this weapon was just to remove the muzzle flash. Right now it's really distracting and obstructive of the target, and I feel like that would have been a much better option for making No Time to Explain a little bit more viable. But we'll take Headseeker. So before we move on to the next section, I'd just like to take a quick moment to mention some weapons that I thought could have used a buff in this patch, particularly Red Death, the Fourth Horseman, and the Chaperone. I feel like all 3 of those guns, you don't really see a lot of them in really any activity, and could have used an individual buff. I know that Red Death, you could say, kind of got nerfed buff with this patch due to some later things we'll talk about, but I just wanted to mention that. So, moving on to the next section, sniper rifles. Okay, this one I can see is definitely going to be the most controversial component of this patch. So what did they do? Reduce damage on the basically 1,000 yard stare archetype of sniper rifles by 7%, more or less, and reduce target acquisition for the LDR and longbow to bring in line with other snipers in the same archetype. Furthermore, they also basically increase the amount of flinch you take from 30% to 50%. So right off the bat, I feel that the changes to flinch were absolutely needed. There would be so many circumstances where you would be dueling with a sniper and you'd be hitting them with several shots, about ready to down them, and then just all of a sudden they miraculously pull a headshot out of the air and win the engagement. I think that was a little ridiculous, and I think this will help perhaps, mitigate some of those rage-inducing moments. The other component, basically reducing the damage of the 1,000 yard stare archetype such that they can no longer one-shot guardians, most guardians, out of their supers, and we're talking roaming supers, so, Blade Dance, Storm Trance, and Sunbreak. This, I feel like, was already a pretty high skill thing to do, and, even against normal players, against really high level players, this was almost impossible to do just because they know how to move to avoid this. And this change just basically gives no incentive to use the 1,000 yard stare archetype. Why not use the next lowest tier, so the Defiance of Yasmin archetype? It can do basically the same thing with generally higher inventory, aim assist, and less recoil. If they're saying that if you want to do if you want to hit, one-shot guardians out of their super, you're gonna have to use Black Spindle. Well, that gives up your exotic slot, which is not ideal, and I just feel this was a little bit overkill. Not to mention the PvE implications of doing less damage and taking more flinch. It's going to make encounters like, say, the War Priest, even though it's on its way out for going into year 3, but similar circumstances where you're taking fire and trying to put damage on a boss is going to be a lot harder. So there might be some PvE implications. So I'm not sure I would agree with this. I can see where they're coming from. They don't want people getting one shot with this impact archetype. They want that reserved for the Black Spindle and any perhaps legendary variants that might be coming in Rise of Iron. I just feel that performing this reliably was already fairly difficult. So I'm not too sure about that. Also, the reduced target acquisition / aim assist for the LDR and longbow. I would have felt that perhaps just a blanket aim assist reduction, small aim assist reduction to all snipers, I think would have, I don't want to say better, but would have fared just as well. So I'm not sure how sold I am on this, and will definitely be interesting to see how the community reacts. That being said, I definitely feel that the increase to flinch when receiving fire, that's definitely worth it. Definitely was needed. Alright, so continuing on with auto rifles. Only a few changes here. Reduce the maximum magazine size for highest rate of fire auto rifles, so that's like your Doctrine of Passing, Necrochasm, Arminius D, as well as increasing damage to the middle rate of fire autos. I think these are both good. Any changes, buffs I should say, to the auto rifle category, pretty much all the archetypes except for the Doctrine archetype are good. They're quite underrepresented right now in both PvE and PvP. I don't think the magazine size decrease for the super high rate of fires will be, a huge nerf, but definitely will welcome the increase to the middle rate of fire. Continuing on furthermore, so the Titan-specific shotgun Immobius basically decreased spread as well as an increased stability by 60%. Furthermore, reduced spread angle penalty on shotguns with a full auto perk, not including invective, and increased high rate of fire and middle-low rate of fire shotgun damages by 2%. So this is a pretty sizable buff for the Titan-specific shotgun. I don't think it will be in, drastic changes, but, that's good overall. And then the reducing that, for whatever reason, ridiculous accuracy penalty you received when running full auto on a shotgun. I think that's definitely the right move too. I didn't really feel like there was any reason for that. And then this small increase in damage to the two high rate of fire and middle low rate of fire shotguns. I think that's good as well. I don't see these changes having really broad effects. I feel like people are still going to gravitate towards the Party Crasher, Fellwinter, Conspiracy Theory archetype shotguns. Those have proven themselves time and time again to be the most reliable, at least in terms of PvP. Maybe in PvE we'll see some more widespread use of other shotguns, but I doubt it. Next up are pulse rifles. So the Lyudmila got an increased fire rate, and the mid-impact, so Neuwind's Red Death, got a 2% increase to damage. I would have liked to have seen like a blanket buff to the high-impact pulse rifles, but an increased fire rate for the Lyudmila will take that. This gun, even with the optimal perks of like counterbalance, braced frame, and all that, this gun is still, you know, arduous at times to use, so I don't see it really entering a super competitive meta. But, you know, we'll take what we can get. The 2% increase to the kind of mid-tier impact is good, but I don't believe this will change your time to kill in PvP. You might see some, like, might take, you know, one less headshot or whatever, meaning it's a little bit more forgiving, but I believe the time to kill will remain the same. So, you know, this is a very, how do I phrase this? It's a very forgiving archetype, but not super competitive. So, moving on next to sidearms. There are quite a few bullet points here, so I'm not going to read them all. Basically, they just they all kind of combine and translate into a nerf buff to all sidearms that are not the Vestian Dynasty and Drake's Promise. That being said, it'll be interesting to see if sidearms can kind of break into the meta along with shotguns. We'll see, you know, what Rise of Iron brings for this particular weapon class, but I think this is mostly good here, because as of right now, I don't know about you guys, but I only really see sidearms when they're paired with No Land Beyond specifically. So hopefully we can, you know, this net buff will hopefully encourage their use a little bit more. We'll have to see going into year 3. Moving on, we have rocket launchers, so increase the effective range on explosions for the cluster bomb perk, as well as reducing, basically nerfing grenades and horseshoes on all rocket launchers that are not truth. To be totally honest, I don't understand this move by Bungie. I feel like the nerf to grenades and horseshoes back at the end of year 1, start of year 2, was enough to get the message across that they wanted people to be a little bit more precise with their rocket launcher, rockets, shots, however you want to phrase it. I don't think the buff to cluster bombs is going to make people gravitate towards that over grenades and horseshoes. And furthermore, because truth is not affected, this is basically Bungie just telling you, hey, if you don't already switch to heavy, or to truth during the heavy rounds, well, you better do it now if you run rocket launchers. And of course, that has no meaning for competitive, where they don't use heavy anyway. Machine guns are next, and increased damage on the highest rate of fire machine guns by 4%. I don't see this having a huge impact, really. I feel like the machine gun class is almost dominantly controlled by the Quillum's BTRD Thunderlord archetype. I can't even name a single gun in the highest rate of fire. I think the Song of Ir-Yût from year 1 Crota's End is in that archetype. Either way, at least in PvP and for a lot of PvE that I've done, I don't see this archetype being that popular, so anything we can do to help that out is good. Okay, so this could also be a controversial aspect of this patch, and that is, so basically they're fixing a few bugs with hand cannons, as you can see here, but what I think most people are going to be disappointed about is the lack of addressing the problem with, you know, ghost bullets, bloom, RNG bullets, in quotation, that whole problem that the community as a whole is expressing. I believe bloom is the technical term. You know, I don't think we need to go back to year 1, where hand cannons were effective at ranges far beyond their intended role, but I think something needs to be addressed with the blue mechanic, especially now that you have got like Thorn getting hit with a huge range nerf. I mean, all of this bloom stuff is all kind of tied up in the range stat, so I think the community is definitely going to be a little upset that there was no mention of that here. So we'll see what direction Bungie wants to take with that. And then last and certainly not least, we have fusion rifles. I think the main thing is that there were no unnecessary nerfs. This class of secondary or special weapon is already criminally underrepresented right now and doesn't need any nerfs. Maybe, I mean, there's some good standouts. I mean, Plan C is all right. Maybe could have used a little bit of a blanket buff to like range or a little bit, but the main thing is no unnecessary nerfs. Pat on the back for Bungie. So the last section of the update deals with a number of perks that are sort of being reworked. You can see them here. So Take a Knee. After crouching for a little bit of time, you get a reduction in flinch and an increased ADS speed. That's good, but I feel that not a lot of people are going to utilize this in PvP. Maybe in PvE, we'll see with the new raid. You have Exhumed and Cascade getting small buffs, but to be totally honest with you, these perks are still bottom of the tier. I don't think these changes are going to make people gravitate towards them anymore. I will say that the changes to Surplus, this is fairly substantial. This is basically a sort of Field Scout-esque perk, in addition to kind of having a Ruin Wings effect where it's special ammo or whatever ammo is dropping more frequently. If this perk can roll on guns that are not of the Hawk or Hake, however you pronounce it, type, I think this will be a top tier PvE perk without a doubt. Grave Robber, again, same thing as Exhumed and Cascade. There's no reason to use this perk. Same thing goes for Guerrilla Fighter. These extremely niche perks, I think, just either need to be completely reworked or just removed from their respective perk pools to give people a better chance of getting the better perks. And then you can see kind of some magazine / ammo type changes. I think these are mostly good. They make sense. I don't have a lot to say. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how they fare, in the wild and in real use. But right now, I don't see anything glaringly wrong with this. And last but certainly not least, we have a small nerf to unflinching, such that it goes from a 25% reduction to a 15% reduction. I think this is okay, but largely unneeded, especially since the main offenders of this were sniper rifles. As I mentioned earlier, this kind of translates to like a small nerf to guns like Red Death, and I think the Boolean has unflinching on it as well. So it kind of translates to nerfs to those. I think we probably could have done without this. I think this is going to be hard to notice. I don't understand. I mean, I know where they're coming from, but I don't think we needed this. And then a fix to the Firefly crashing thing. So overall, I would say this is a pretty good patch for Bungie. We'll have to see, as with every patch, how it ages. Some standouts, I believe, are the range nerf to Thorn being really not needed at all. The reducing of the damage of the 1,000 yard stare archetype basically kind of means that archetype no longer has a purpose. Everyone's just going to use either Black Spindle or Zen Meteor if you're on PlayStation, and or the lower tier or the lower impact ones like Defiance of Yasmin. Probably that archetype, because that's the lowest archetype that you can res snipe with. And then the last thing I think the community is not going to be happy about, as I mentioned, is the no mention or changes due for the blue mechanic. So looking good. We'll see how Rise of Iron, how the new guns and Rise of Iron fare with this. But overall, not too bad from Bungie. So as always, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys later. Take care.